Today we're talking about raising pheasant chicks. And although it is fall, people can be building and brainstorming this winter to be ready for the spring.
Absolutely. That's actually the good time to start. Yeah, don't order them and then start panicking a week out. There's a little bit of preparation and some good things that should be taken care of before you get them.
Welcome to the Mother Earth News and Friends podcast. At Mother Earth News for 50 years and counting, we've been dedicated to conserving the planet's natural resources while helping you conserve your financial resources. In this podcast, we host conversations with experts in the fields of sustainability, homesteading, natural health, and more to share all about how you can live well wherever you are in a way that values both people and our Mother Earth.
We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, Brinzea. That's BRINSEA, Chick Incubation Specialists. They've been focusing on egg incubator design continuously since 1976, resulting in egg incubators, chick brooders, and incubation accessories. They offer unparalleled practicality, reliability, superior hatch rates, and healthy chicks. Innovation you can trust.
Good day, everyone. I am Kenny Coogan, and joining me on this episode of Mother Earth News and Friends is Brian Davis, Brooder Farm Manager at McFarland Pheasants Incorporated. Brian has been with the hatchery for over 13 years and oversees the young birds in barns from day one until the birds go outside to their flight pens. Today, we're going to be talking about caring for pheasant chicks. Welcome to the podcast, Brian.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Today we're going to be talking about caring for pheasant chicks, but Brian, what species are we specifically discussing today?
We're going to stick with the most common in the upper Midwest and the United States. That's the ringneck pheasant.
I'm not sure if people start off with pheasants. They might first start off with chickens and then move into pheasants. Would you recommend somebody starting with chicks or eggs first?
Chicks are a lot easier to get and a lot easier to handle. Take the easier approach there. You don't have to be set up for the incubation process and all those other things that come with eggs. One of those would be sourcing the eggs or somehow breeding them yourself. But chicks are pretty readily available across the US. And the nice thing is you can ship them through the mail. So you can generally get them C to C, basically. And it's a pretty easy process.
Most people are raising chickens for eggs, and then maybe the byproduct of that is meat. But most people are raising pheasants to stalk or hunt. So it doesn't really matter the sex ratio that you receive, right?
No, in general, the rooster, the male pheasant, is actually more sought after, especially on the hunting side. In some states, even if you do raise hens, you may not be able to hunt them, hypothetically, unless you're in a preserve situation. But hens are a little bit smaller, so if you're looking for a meat bird, you may have better luck with a rooster as far as size is concerned. But as far as raising them goes, it's a lot easier to raise hens. They're not quite as territorial, quite as aggressive towards each other.
Let's back up to day one or day three when people receive their chicks. What type of environment does a baby pheasant need?
It can be very simple or it can be very advanced. In general, you can we start about 4 birds per square foot. So you can have quite a few birds in a small space. The big details that I always talk about are heat, water, and food. So if you have a decent heat source, good clean water, and a good feed, you can do things pretty easily, pretty efficiently in a small space. You can go larger if you have a building or have a coop that you're not necessarily using at that time of year and it's clean and disinfected. You can stick with that 4 birds per square feet for the first 3 weeks. Then you have to start thinking about the next space, the larger spaces as the birds get older. You can start with just a heat lamp. A simple heat lamp will work just like a chicken. Ambient space, you probably want around 90 to 94 degrees. Right underneath the heat source, you'd want that up in the 100-degree range so the birds can find their comfort zone. And you can start them on a chopped straw is probably our first recommendation. On the farm here, we tend to use a large flake pine shaving. There are places even in our recommendations that we say not to use wood shavings. Most of that is due to the fact that pheasants will pick those up and eat them. And if they fill their guts full of straw, there's no nutritional value and just essentially starve out with feeling full. So
Now, Brian, we are filming mid-fall. Is there a preferred season to be obtaining pheasant chicks?
yeah, absolutely. Actually, right now, there probably isn't much for pheasant chicks available, to be honest. Say here, we're already prepping for next year's season. So we're selecting our breeders now from our flocks from this season to create eggs for next season. We will start selling our chicks in October for next season. Those chicks will not come available until March. So it's generally a March to August type of thing. The earlier in the season, obviously those birds will have to go outside in a colder situation or a cooler situation, especially here in the upper Midwest. So a mid-season, if you're just starting out, late May, mid-May to mid-July is probably a good time frame for people to raise pheasant chicks. Reason for that is it's warmer outside. You don't have to spend as many resources on fuel maybe to keep your brooder house or your brooder area warm. And then once they're ready to go outside, you're not so worried about the temperature outside. You're able to focus more on the rain situations and get them outside without too much trouble.
So today we're talking about raising pheasant chicks. And although it is fall, people can be building and brainstorming this winter to be ready for the spring.
Absolutely. That's actually the good time to start. Yeah. Don't order them and then start panicking a week out. There's a little bit of preparation and some good things that should be taken care of before you get them.
We know that we do not want them to be eating wood shavings. So what feed do you recommend a baby pheasant eat?
Do your best to find a complete crumble feed. When I say complete, it's got everything they need in one bite, essentially. It's a 30%, up to a 30% protein level. Sometimes it's hard to find if you're in an area where there's not so many farm stores. It's whatever you can find with the highest protein. So even if all you can find is a 26% protein, that's still a good feed. Turkey starters, game bird starters, there's companies out there that are making a really nice feed. And crumble's important. So if all you can find is a pellet, you may have to grind that down or crush that down just to make sure they can eat it in the first few days.
Do you recommend that the feed is medicated?
We do recommend a medicated feed. Best case scenario, it's medicated for a cocci, so a coccidiostat built in. Typically, common ones would be like an amprolium, or Avatec is also a good coccidiostat that you may find in some feeds.
You mentioned that the feed should be a crumble. Can you, using the scale of a baby chicken or a baby duck or goose, can you tell us how big a baby pheasant is when they first hatch?
Oh gosh, in some cases they could be half the size.
They're
They
tiny.
they can, yeah, they're pretty small. A pheasant egg is probably just a little bit bigger than a quarter if you were to look at it that way. Yeah, day one, they're pretty small at times, and actually I prefer to do it. We start them on like a gel product. We'll add a little bit of a brand name would be like a grow gel, or Avavite is another one. And they're green. They're like a green gel that you can mix up and you sprinkle over the feed, and that green color really attracts them to the feed. So it really gets them going. It's a probiotic as well, gets their guts moving the right direction, and that all helps. Anything you can do to really get them interested in that food and with a little bit of nutritional value and hydration, it all helps getting those chicks started.
I think the United States Post Office has been shipping chicken chicks since the late 1800s. When you ship the baby pheasants, I know that they have those yolks still attached to them, but is there gel or any feed, or are you not concerned because it's so fast?
We absolutely put that grow gel product in the boxes with the chicks. That'll hold them over for those. Generally, your birds will get to you in 2 days. But there are places where things aren't as efficient in the Postal Service, and those birds can get stressed. So we definitely do put that gel in there to keep them good and healthy for the shipment.
You recommend that the feed is medicated. Is there an option for baby pheasants to be vaccinated, or do you think they should be vaccinated?
We don't really mess much with the vaccination stuff. Can they be vaccinated? I believe there is technology out there that they could be vaccinated. Generally, any technology that's available in the other poultry worlds could be. Like, that's all I can really say. I don't know a whole lot about that going into the depths, but there isn't really anything that we vaccinate for.
The number of pheasants you raise is going to be based on if you're stalking, if you're hunting, maybe the end goal. But for shipping and brooding purposes, what is the minimum number of baby pheasants somebody should obtain?
As far as brooding is concerned, there really isn't a minimum. Obviously, there could be a maximum. It's all size restrictions at that point. But as far as getting your chicks, a lot of places will have a minimum that you have to order in order to put them in through the Postal Service. Some of that has to do with keeping those chicks warm, to be honest. If they get into a cool situation, they do and will huddle. So our minimum when ordering from us for chicks would be 10 birds.
I remember growing up in like the 90s, the minimum was 25 birds. And now
Yeah.
some chicken places can ship you 3 safely.
Sure. Yeah. And a lot of that comes with just different size boxes and the technology in paper products. Really, you can really work on getting that temperature just right in a shipment. And that has to do with a lot of it. If birds get overstressed in shipments and show up in rough condition, a lot of it has to do with temperature and what they were put through on their way there.
Can you mix pheasant species in the same brooder?
From what I understand, yes, you can. It's not something we do. We generally don't do a lot of the ornamentals. Some of those ornamentals, they have obviously flock to flock, pheasants have a different personality, but species to species, just like anything else, there's some challenging personalities that may come out of a box, and not so much of an issue early, but as the birds get older and they may take on their territorial sides or their aggressive sides, I have heard that certain ornamentals are more aggressive than the ringneck pheasant.
And what about mixing the sexes? How long are you good for any ratio that you happen to receive? When do you have
Sure.
to start separating them?
So we will raise based on what our needs are. We'll try to split them up at times, but we also have some that are raised together. We would call that a straight run if they're raised together. Basically, your half and half is what the idea of that ratio is. So 50-50. You can raise those absolutely 50-50, actually all the way through. The issues you may see is if it's an early flock, let's just use the month of March, for example, especially in the upper Midwest. As those birds get older, those birds are early enough that they may come in to maturity before the end of the season. So they may try to start breeding or get aggressive to the point that they will pick on each other quite hard, and especially the males will come in. In general, you just have to watch it. You have to watch your densities. It's better to have more hens than roosters in that situation. If you get too many roosters and not enough hens, they may start to pick on them, and to the point of they may be so aggressive coming into maturity that they may kill them. But mid-season, you keep your densities right out in your flight pens, or it's generally once they get outside. In the barns, you really, on the first few days, unless what you're looking for, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, male to female. By the time they're 6 and 7 weeks old, yeah, you can see them. An untrained eye can start to pick them out a little bit more. The roosters will get a little bigger and a little more color. But in general, you can raise them all the way through with little issues, and most growers do. We sex out all our groups. So we have hens here and roosters over there, and a lot of that comes with our shipping and our shipping needs. As we get a customer who may only want roosters because those are what they can hunt.
We're going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsor, and when we return, we'll be focusing on raising pheasants for profit.
Brinzy products are designed to be long-lasting and energy efficient. Their advanced series incubators and brooders feature the latest state-of-the-art digital control systems, providing instant readings of temperature and humidity to ensure successful hatches and healthy chicks. Check out Brinzy incubators and more at brinzy.com. That's www.brinsea.com.
We are back with Brian Davis, Brooder Farm Manager at McFarland Pheasants Incorporated. So we just talked about transitioning pheasant chicks from a brooder to a larger area. Are we concerned about training them to eat on their own? Or once we release them, because they're a wild bird and not really domesticated, they're good to go?
No, they definitely need a little bit of help. When you start moving to your larger areas or you're going outside with your birds, there is a transition period. They generally, coming from a pen raised situation, a barn raised situation, they've had feed in front of their face their whole life. Easy to get to. That's what we want. We want it to be easy. We want them to grow. When they start moving to the outside world, things may not be as easy, right? There's going to be challenges for them. So you still want it to be easy, but at the same time, you want them to get a little more wild. So flight pen wise, we make sure there's cover in there, and that helps them to adapt to that outside world as well, along with being able to hide if there's rain, or even, as weird as it sounds, there could be a predator that ends up somehow getting to them. But if you were to release them outside, at least for the first while, as long as they'll stick around, I would recommend a supplemental feeding, something in the open where they can get to pretty easy. That's stocking them as well. Do your best to maybe put a range feeder out in the middle of nowhere and see how it goes. They got plenty of challenges. The big one is predators will do just about anything they can, and they're everywhere. Unless you're about, as tight as can be, they're going to be there.
So you move them from the brooder, maybe a barn or a really large pen, and then you have a flight pen. And does this flight pen look like branches and trees and evergreens and grass? Does it look like the wild?
In some cases, yeah. We use posts for the frame, and then we run like aircraft cable along it with chicken wire on the outside. And then up on top, we have a 2-inch netting that goes across the top, obviously to keep them in. Inside that, we grow cover, whether it's some kind of weed that we can get to grow that works really nice. Some of our favorites the farmers hate, but lamb's quarter is a really good cover for pheasants. It's got low cover, it's got high cover, and generally it survives some of those first frosts or survives through the summer heat up here in the upper Midwest. You can get away with some ragweed, another favorite for all the allergy folks out there, but it does a good enough job for cover, especially if it's only one group that's going through that pen, but it tends to get stocky down low and doesn't provide the best cover. But yeah, it can be a jungle in those pens for sure. And cover is very important, but so is open space. The birds really prefer to spend their time in the open space. A third of your pen is going to end up being open, completely open, no cover. If there's not enough open space, those birds will get as rambunctious and as aggressive as they would if there was no cover. They like to have their little spots. In some cases, they're just like a human. They don't want to be right on top of each other. It definitely can be like a jungle out there. If you're unable to grow the cover, there's things you can do. You can plant corn, you can plant milo, mullet. There's things out there you can plant for sure to make sure you have that. Or sometimes it comes down to whatever you can get. There are growers putting Christmas trees dead on their sides or branches, or depends on whatever you can do in your space. We can go back to how we do things from the brooder, how we transition out. We start them pretty tight in 3 weeks at 4 birds per square feet. They're in one room, and then we double their space at 3 weeks. So they go from a quarter of a square foot to half a square foot per bird. And then they're in there until they're about 6 or 7 weeks, and that's when we will put them outside. And before we put them outside, we got to make sure that the weather's right. So we may have to move a few days here, a few days there to make sure that our temperatures are right. And we try to minimize the chance of rain for those first 3 days, because we need those birds' oil glands to get going before they get rained on too heavy.
And what age can you open up the pens?
So open up the pens to outside. There are growers and there are places in the world where that's 7 weeks. They're basically on their own or to some level. with the supplemental feed and the actually supervision. There's gamekeepers. That's their job, is to make sure their 7-week olds out in the wild stay close and are safe. As far as we're concerned, our birds are marketable at about 22 weeks old. What we're looking for in that, a lot of it goes towards that hunting side. A long tail, a full long tail, fully feathered. Tails are they're the trophy in the pheasant world. The longer the tail, the generally older the bird. We can do some things with genetic selecting that gets us a longer tail earlier. We want those tails tight. When tails grow, they start at the base, and that base may not be quite tight on those two long king feathers on the tail. And so when we ship them in crates, they may come out if they're not tight enough. Yeah, 22 weeks is a marketable bird. The longer you have them, the more you got to feed them. So your margins may go down the longer you have to hold on to them.
When you open up the pen, is there a bolt to the wild, or do they keep coming back as long as there's feed?
Yeah, even when they're in the pens, the first thing they want to do is get out. Once they finally get out, they want to come back. Even if you were to open a door wide open, it would take them. They're a little curious at first, and once the first one pops out and the next one pops out, then there'll be a steady stream. They can find an 8-inch hole about as fast as a 10-foot hole. It's pretty slow going at first, but once they find it, they start moving through pretty quick.
What type of operation would somebody need to start raising pheasants for profit?
There's a lot of decisions that need to be made and a lot of things to think about. And really, it comes down to, what do you have in your area, or as far as markets? That's the first things to talk about. Okay, you got a hunt club nearby or some market that, whether it's a restaurant or whatever it may be, is it marketable? If you don't have it close by, can you get the birds there? So transporting, but we can go back to, what does it take to start them? So you got to have a building to at least get them through their first 6-7 weeks, probably. Then you got to have, a flight pen of sorts or a building of sorts that can handle mature birds. And those mature birds in general need 20 to 23 feet per bird. When you start talking about the spatial needs of a bird outside without them becoming aggressive and fighting. So there's those spatial limitations, right? Beyond that, you got to have your vehicles and your crates and your tools to maintain those pens, those buildings, the transportation idea. The things that we don't always think about but are uber important is biosecurity. You need to make sure that the diseases that are out there, or the outside birds aren't bringing anything in, or you yourself isn't working on a chicken farm and then going home and potentially bringing something there, or bringing something from home to your job or to your other facilities. There's lots of viruses and bacteria in the world that can really wreck your operation or your startup stuff. So startups are huge. Beyond that, a veterinarian is very important. They can help you through some hard times and make sure that your birds are the best they can be. They can develop a plan for care, or if you have to travel with those birds, you need their signature saying those birds are top notch, are healthy, can travel, can cross state lines if you need to. The NPIP, which is the National Poultry Improvement Plan, that monitors all poultry really and makes sure that you're not going to be taking a bird to a fair somewhere, or whatever it may be, to a delivery that may spread palorum or other viruses. There's lots of risks associated with starting a pheasant farm. Is it possible? Yeah, absolutely. There's people that have started farms in the last few years. I know of a few personally, and starting small, but as they double their production, or they can move up the ranks. You got to have staff if you're going to have a lot, or a big family anyway, somehow to keep your costs down and do the work yourself. It's rewarding, absolutely. And just like anything else, if you can raise a flock and be successful, it's a pretty rewarding experience.
I like the part that you just said about scaling up, because I have a lot of my own endeavors, and I always think about, you need to scale up in the right ratio to prevent all those overhead costs from being a debt rather than an asset.
Right. Yep, absolutely. And there's always things you forget about as you're trying to scale up, or this isn't so bad, how can we do this? And before you know it, there's all those fuel costs and utility costs, and Lots of costs out there, really. And then you got to remember, you're paying all this up front. You don't get paid potentially till they're 22 weeks old. If you're buying chicks, there's a big expense. And then those birds are going to eat by the time they're, let's say 10 weeks, they're going to get close to eating a pound per week. And feed's about a quarter a pound. And that's just reality. If you're lucky and you're close to a feed mill and they can work with you and get it to you reasonably, that's awesome. It's not always the case. So it's one of those, take the plunge or find someone who's raising them. And sometimes that can be just as easy or easier, and the costs work out.
Thank you so much, Brian, for this great conversation.
Of course.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Mother Earth News and Friends. To listen to more podcasts and get connected on our social media, visit www.motherearthnews.com/podcast. You can also email us at podcast@ogdenpubs.com with any questions or suggestions. Our podcast production team includes Kenny Coogan, Alyssa Warner, and myself, Josh Wilder. For those of you who don't recognize my voice, I'm the content director for Mother Earth News. You will hear my voice a bit more often as I'm taking over some podcast production work for Jessica Anderson, who did excellent work here for the podcast for over 7 years, but has recently moved on to work with a local organization here in Kansas called Monarch Watch that endeavors to provide the public with information about the biology of monarch butterflies, their spectacular migration, and how to use monarchs to further science education in primary and secondary schools. Thanks so much to Jessica for everything she added to what we do. We're excited to see her next chapter and plan to have her on in the near future to discuss Monarch Watch's work. Music for this episode is the song Hustle by Kevin MacLeod. The Mother Earth News and Friends podcast is a production of Ogden Publications.
Thanks again to Brinzy, our sponsor for this Mother Earth News and Friends podcast episode. You too can experience the Brinzy difference and maximize your hatch rates with Brinzy incubators that monitor temperature and humidity and are made of antimicrobial materials. Brinzy ships worldwide and provides stellar customer support to answer all your questions. Hatch your chicks with Brinzy, the leader in innovative incubation research. Learn more at brinzy.com. Again, that's www.brinsea.com. Until next time, don't forget to love your mother.